I used to be this person who always had a reason for why he wasn't where he should be in life. If I did not get the grades that I wanted, then it was probably because some professor had a grudge against me. And if I didn't get the job that I wanted, then I would always blame the interview process. It was just never something that was my fault. And to be honest, having this belief that all the negative outcomes in your life are somehow the fault of some external events and never yours, this kind of makes you feel good in the short term. But then I realized that this mindset was forever going to make me fail at things. If you truly believe that the negative outcomes in your life are not your fault and you come up with a bunch of excuses for them, then what you're pretty much saying is that there is nothing you as a person can do to change your life. And you're forever going to be this victim to all these external forces. And when I started living my life with this mindset of coming up with excuses, I realized that I was no longer giving 100% to things. I would procrastinate a lot, I would be addicted to instant pleasures, and I had pretty shitty mental health. But that is not who I am anymore. Fast forward to 2024, I have now worked as a software engineer at Fortune 500 companies. Additionally, I've been one of the best performing students in both my bachelor's and my master's program. I am now someone who is highly disciplined and productive. In this video, I'll share with you a couple of tips that allowed me to overcome my excuses and actually become disciplined. The very first thing that should form the foundation of your discipline is absolute accountability. So by this, I don't mean you should be bashing yourself and bringing yourself down. But instead, I would want you to convince yourself that no matter what hopeless place you are in life, you are the one who drove yourself in that ditch. And I know this is a bit of a brutal thing to accept about yourself, but what this implies is that the steering wheel of your life is in your hands. You are the one making the turns, and if you could drive yourself into a ditch, then you can also drive yourself out of a ditch. Once you have this absolute accountability mindset, it is then when you can even begin to ask yourself questions to your problems. Like, hey, what did I do wrong here? What is the solution to this problem? How do I fix this? Like, take this for example. Imagine there was this one fat person, and in the first scenario, he thinks that he's fat because of his genes or because of having high thyroid or whatever may be the reason. He thinks it is external to him and he has no control over it. But in the second scenario, this person knows that he's fat because he has used fast food as a coping mechanism in the past, and he's somewhat directly responsible for his condition. He does this without bringing himself down or bashing, but as a matter of fact, like, okay, my actions have caused me to become fat. In which scenario do you think that person is going to have a better shot at losing weight? In scenario one, if you're like blaming external factors, you have literally just switched off your brain from ever considering solutions to your problems. Even if the solutions were staring right at your face, you wouldn't consider them because in your mind there is nothing that you can do about your situation. It's all external factors, and this leads a person to being stuck with that problem forever. But in the second scenario, if you actually take accountability and know that you're in this bad situation because of your own actions, then it means that your brain is now possibly looking for solutions. And it doesn't mean that the perfect solution is just going to come out of nowhere and land on your lap. Maybe you try one solution, you found it through a YouTube video, it did not work. Maybe you try the second solution, you found it on a podcast, that doesn't work either. But eventually you try solution 7 that you saw on an Instagram reel, and that happens to work. And that has now completely eliminated your problem. And I know that I'm going to receive some pushback for saying that, yeah, most negative outcomes in your life are directly your fault and not necessarily the circumstances that you're in. Like, someone could claim that, hey, I was an orphan, or my parents were alcoholic, or I was born in a third world country ruled by a tyrant. Like, I don't disagree. There are going to be circumstances which seem extremely unfair. You could be prepping for a job interview for 6 months, and on the day of the interview, you actually fall sick. But in my opinion, even in those circumstances where objectively, yeah, it's the external things that have caused this failure, it is still better to have this mindset of absolute accountability because it offers you the best chance to deal with that circumstance. And I personally like this quote from Andrew Tate in which he says, even if it rains outside, it is my fault. Now, of course, we all know that there's no way that you can actually control rain, but it just shows to me how powerful his mindset is. He basically refuses to be a victim of life. So back when I was living a life without discipline, I would actually still set up routines and a bunch of rules for myself. Like, right, I'm going to eat healthy and I'm going to start waking up at 5 a.m. And for the first couple of days, I would actually follow these rules. But then I would start cutting corners. For example, like, I would go out with my friends to a fast food place and I would see everyone consuming fast food. And I would just negotiate with myself that, you know what, maybe having one bite is not all that bad. Or maybe I can just do this on the weekends. I would do all these mental gymnastics with the rules. What happened when I started doing this was that my routine, my rules, they stopped being powerful. They stopped being holy to me. Like, I felt that there was this chink in my armor. I knew deep down that I had cheated. And this eventually led to the door opening for all the degenerate activities. And I was back to square one, living the way that I was. That is why now when I set up rules and routines for myself, I never look to cut corners anymore or negotiate with myself anymore. If I made it a rule that I'm going to go to bed at 9 p.m., not 9:10, not 9:15, 9 p.m. And I know that some of you that are watching this think that this approach is probably a bit too much. But what I've always found is that I am much better at staying super disciplined than being kind of lenient or moderately disciplined and cutting corners here and there. And when you're just all in and you start adhering to these rules and routines sincerely, then you begin to feel really strong and proud of yourself. And this makes it much more easier to follow this hyper disciplined approach than just a lenient approach. In the past, whenever I would have a negative outcome in my life, like maybe I had bombed an exam, or maybe I skipped my alarm and failed to wake up, I would always look back and think that, oh, I wish I had performed better in that exam while I was writing it. Or, oh, I wish I would have just used raw willpower and just woken up in that moment, and how different my life would be then. What I later understood was that the real failure does not happen at that moment. It actually happens way earlier. For example, me bombing that exam was not the actual point of failure. The real point of failure was me not having a study schedule for months, and me not being able to wake up and skipping my alarm was not the point of failure. The real point of failure was me staying up late at 2 a.m. watching Netflix and being sleep deprived. That was the real point. And when you're able to spot these real points of failure in your life, then you're much more likely to switch the outcomes. The rules that I've now set up in my life are very different. Now the rule is not to wake up at 5 a.m. at any cost necessary, but the rule is rather to go to bed early. Now that I've switched my rules from being outcome oriented to point of failure oriented, I found a lot more success. Here's an action step for you. Write down all the negative outcomes in your life that keep happening over and over again. And then ask yourself, what is the true point of failure for this outcome? And you might actually be shocked by the answer. This point of failure could have occurred maybe days, weeks, months, or even years before the actual event. And now when you would actually address the real point of failure, it's much more easier to make these behavioral changes. Like, for example, it's much more easier to not go to the fast food restaurant than it is to have a burger in your mouth and to stop yourself from eating it. If you would like to work with me and build yourself a strong foundation of discipline, one that is long lasting and does not rely on willpower, then make sure that you click on the link in the description and book a one-on-one call with me. Or you could also DM me on Instagram. My ID is Jibreal Khan 97. It's also there in the description below.